Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar of Positive Future. I'm very pleased to host this webinar tonight. I'm Simon Luck, the scientific director of the Paris Institute for Advanced Study. And I'm very pleased to have with me tonight Karim Jebari and Markus Furendal, who I'm going to present in a few seconds. Just as a reminder, a few words about the Positive Future Initiative. It's an initiative organized by the Paris Institute for Advanced Study and the 2100 Foundation in partnership with the Institute for Futures Studies in Sweden, of which we have a representative today in the person of Karim. So we're very glad that you're in a way inaugurating the collaboration in a new way. This initiative aims at reflecting on the future with a positive perspective, and we've decided to work a little bit on work itself, among other topics. So we've had a first webinar a month ago on this topic in French. And now we have another one, which will be about the future of human-machine cooperation in the workplace. How will AI impact the development of human potential? So that's, of course, a big question. And tonight, Karim and Markus are going to talk about it. Karim is a researcher at the Institute for Future Studies, as I mentioned. He defended his thesis in 2014 at the Royal Institute of Technology, the KTH. The doctoral thesis dealt with applied ethics, and in particular, how we should relate to the risks and opportunities of technological innovation. Karim is interested more generally in issues related to political philosophy, bioethics, and the philosophy of science. Markus is a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Political Science at Stockholm University. He is interested in issues relating to politics, philosophy, and economics, and he currently works on a project concerning the global governance of artificial intelligence and how the benefits and burdens created by increasingly capable AI should be distributed. So we have two specialists of the questions at stake tonight, and I will no longer speak and leave you the floor, Markus and Karim. The floor is yours for as long as you want, but no more than 45 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Are you all hearing me okay? Can I speak like this? I'll begin this presentation, but first of all, thanks a lot to the Institute and to Positive Futures for organizing this webinar, and to Simon in particular for inviting us and reaching out to us and offering us this opportunity to present our research on this topic. It's very good to see you all, and I hope we can have a stimulating discussion after we've talked about this project of ours. So it's essentially a paper that we're working on at the moment, and we have a rather finished draft, but it's still a work in progress. So any comments about this is greatly appreciated, and it helps us to develop our thoughts about this. And then a second thing before we start, perhaps, is that so this paper is perhaps we talked about this earlier, Karim and I. We are perhaps a bit pessimistic about the future of work, at least when considering the fact that we're presenting at this the project of Positive Futures. But we will try to say something more positive towards the end as well, because I mean, and when I say that we're pessimistic, I mean that so looking at how AI already has impacted human and machine cooperation in the workplace, there are some pretty dismal examples to look at, and in particular in this paper we look at how the company Amazon has started to use these kinds of technologies. So this will all be clearer in a minute when we start presenting. So anyway, we are not full on pessimists, but we could also see the potential for a more positive future, and we look forward to discussing that with you all as well. Anyway, so let's try this. If I can, that's right. So just to set the stage for so sort of the background of this paper, I mean, I guess you all have heard about public discussion, media discussion, and also academic discussion about how AI, increasingly complex or advanced or capable artificial intelligence, will probably and already has started to impact how work is organized, and in particular the cooperation between machines or AIs and people will probably be quite interesting from a normative perspective and have large implications for how society is organized. So, and the most common picture around this, or the most common idea or most commonly discussed topic, is perhaps that there's a worry about how automation enabled by AI will impact the availability of work as such, or job opportunities, right? So when we talk about the future of work in the age of AI, very common topics are this idea of, will there be mass unemployment? Will the machines come and take all of our jobs? And what will happen then? Perhaps we have to reorganize society and implement some kind of universal basic income, for instance. So when people can't rely on having a job of their own because the machines have taken it, then people will have to be provided their means of subsistence in some other way, for instance, through a universal basic income or a UBI. That's a very large discussion, right, in the academic literature and also in the public debate. And in response to that kind of worry, you oftentimes hear other people responding that we don't have to be concerned about this because AI is also productivity enhancing. When we shift towards a kind of production that relies heavily on these kinds of machines or these kinds of capable computers, they will also increase economic growth. They will make the production more efficient and increase productivity in an economy. And hopefully that will get the wheels spinning and will create higher demand, for instance, or like offsetting effects. So even though there's unemployment caused by automation, there are also other kinds of effects that are good or have positive impact on the demand for labor, for instance. So like I talked to a more senior scholar about this once, and he brought up the example of just look at Downton Abbey, for instance. Look at all the people employed in the Downton Abbey household, all the footmen and the servants and people looking after these rich people. I mean, when the agricultural revolution happened and these large houses couldn't sustain themselves anymore, it's not like all of those people just went unemployed, right? They found other kinds of jobs in other parts of the economy. So we don't have to worry about this. We've seen this kind of technological shifts many times before in history, and it will probably be the same this time. So that's one kind of discussion around the future work and AI. And it's not, this paper of ours or this project is not just a comment to this debate, but we're trying to make an additional point. And that's this kind of debate mixes up several different scenarios of how this kind of technological change could impact the availability or the demand for jobs, which I will explain in a minute. So another way of thinking positively about this is that even though computers are superior to people in some kinds of tasks or some kinds of jobs, and will probably lead to people losing their jobs to the machines. It also seems the case that human and machine teams, like a person cooperating with an AI or a computer being assisted by a human, are still better than machines on many tasks. And we call these kinds of machine teams centaurs, after the phenomenon of people playing chess together with computers. There's this kind of special kind of chess competition where it's not the case that a human plays against a computer, but a human together with a computer plays against a computer. So that's the kind of answer that we that we look closer at in this paper. And this is the central claim. So the kind of human AI productivity enhancing cooperation that I've just described, it could happen either by augmenting human capabilities or by stunting human capabilities. So there are two different scenarios here that we think are overlooked in the existing literature around this. This is a distinction that people rarely make, but it's a normatively important one, because these two scenarios are, not both of them are equally attractive, to say the least. Yeah, we'll go into this in detail, but in a while. But just before we move on, so when we care about how we will avoid the threat of mass unemployment, Karim and our claim is that the best kind of way out of this still could carry some normatively worrisome implications. Because if we rely on centaurs or human and AI cooperation that is stunting human capabilities, that's problematic in itself. So what we should seek when we face this threat or when we try to overcome this problem is a kind of human AI cooperation that instead augments human capabilities. That's sort of the main claim that we'll explain in more detail in a minute. So any claim about work and any theory about what kind of work is good and what kind of work is bad has to have some kind of explanation or way of sorting out different kinds of work or jobs and explain what makes some jobs better than others. This is problematic. There are so many different options if you want to argue along these lines. And I'll explain what we do in this paper in particular. So, for instance, it seems pretty obvious, at least we think, that jobs that can result in bodily injury or decreased welfare are bad jobs, and they're bad jobs for these specific reasons. So it's pretty obvious that we care about people not being injured at work or suffering decreased welfare because they go to a bad job. So that should be part of any explanation that we rely on when we talk about bad or good jobs. But beyond this, beyond the minimum, it's much more difficult. So just looking back at the academic debate here, of course, we have Karl Marx, especially the young Marx, who wrote about the species essence of humans and thought that we as humans, our species essence is to be productive, to cooperate together and produce things. And the right kind of work, the unalienated work that we could strive for in the post-capitalist society, that would be good for us as individuals. Work would be good for us if it has the right form and it harmonizes with the species essence of us as humans. So that's a rather strong claim. And there's also a more contemporary debate around meaningful work or good work. And one early contribution to that debate is by Adina Schwartz, who wrote in the 1980s. She said, for instance, that monotonous and routine jobs, the problem with them is that they prevent workers from rationally forming and acting on autonomous decisions about their lives. So that's something we care about. We care about people being able to form and act on autonomous decisions about what to do with their lives, and bad jobs, monotonous and routine jobs, prevent people from doing that. So that's why they're problematic. A similar theory here is proposed by Ruth Yeoman, who still writes about this, but this is from 2014. She writes that meaningful work is a fundamental human need, which is necessary to realize autonomy, freedom, and dignity. So this is even a thicker concept, which builds even more distinct values into this idea of what meaningful work is. And she also claims that this is a fundamental human need. So this is something that we should care about when we think about how to organize society. We should make sure that everyone has access to meaningful work. But the particular way we go about in this paper is to rely on a paper by Anke Gauss and Lisa Herzog from 2016, where they suggest that the goods of work have distinctive value because they are widely desired by individuals as non-substitutable elements of their conception of the good life, and they cannot be obtained with money. So the idea here is that there are some things that everyone should care about when they strive for whatever conception of the good life they have. And these things aren't, you can't simply buy them, but you have to have access to them in other ways. Specifically, they suggest that 4 things are constitutive of what the goods of work are. So ideally, a good job would give you the chance to pursue excellence. So think of a carpenter or some kind of artisan job. It's something that you get better at the more you do it. It's something that you could perhaps achieve some kind of mastery over after a while. It often feels meaningful to pursue those kinds of jobs compared to many of the monotonous or routine jobs that we talked about earlier. And the second good of work is the chance to make a social contribution. And I mean, that's one of the most discussed things during the pandemic, right? We have talked about the essential jobs that people do that keep society running. So even under lockdowns, some people had to go to job because they made such a large social contribution. And very closely tied to this is the third criteria, the chance to do something that achieves the social recognition of others. So some jobs are more associated with this than others, but it's I mean, you could think of cases where people, even if they don't get much monetary compensation for particular jobs, they still receive some kind of social recognition. So people, for instance, recognize that they make an important social contribution, and that gives you some kind of esteem from your peers, or some kind of status that is independent of the money you make, perhaps. And finally, the fourth one is the ability to pursue some kind of community with others. So ideally, a workplace should perhaps be run in a way that makes you that makes it possible for you to share experiences and talk about them and achieve some kind of community with others. That could take many different forms, of course, but it's obvious that at least some jobs that we usually think of as bad, and we will bring up examples of this a while later, are of the kind that they prevent workers from forming this kind of bond with each other. Let's see. So now that we have some kind of list or idea about what good work is, Karim and I suggest, following Herzog and Gauss, that work also could create bads when work is organized in ways that prevent the pursuit of these goods. So if you're unable to pursue these 4 goods at work, then you have some kind of bad job. But it could also be, Herzog and Gauss suggest, it could also create bad because it undermines or fails to protect other goods that you pursue outside of the workplace or outside of your work life. So, for instance, the health of your of employees or health of people, people's discretionary time, and in cases in which jobs are structured by oppressive hierarchies, the freedom from non-domination. So work could also be bad in a number of different ways. And this is what we picked up on. The first thing I said about this, right, is that work that threatens human welfare, for instance, is bad for that particular reason. It's not because it prevents you from pursuing the 4 goods of work, but it's because it impacts you negatively and your welfare. Okay, so now we have some kind of conception of what constitutes good and bad work and what our main claim is. So I'll leave it to Karim to continue from here to talk about automation.
Thank you very much, Markus. Yeah, so as Markus mentioned before, automation and labor replacing and labor enabling has been at the center of this debate on AI for quite a while. While I think the distinction between these two is not always obvious, that there are some cases of automation that enable people and so on, we make for the kind of sake of the argument and to be brief, a distinction where we argue that labor replacing technology are examples when technology has been resisted by workers who have been made redundant as a direct consequence of a particular technology. And this has been discussed in for example, Erik Brynjolfsson's book with the spinning Jenny and so on and so forth. Whilst labor enabling technology enhances the productivity and has historically been seen as something very positive, although labor enabling technology can, as a consequence, result in that fewer workers are hired in the future and so on. So that's why we mean that the distinction is not always clear, but even if from an economic history point of view, the distinction can be blurred, in the public discourse, there can be a very strong perceived difference between these two. And this can depend on, for example, the rate at which labor is made redundant. If it takes a generation, then we don't perceive it as replacing. But if it takes a week, then it does. Can we have next slide? This is also a bit of a repetition. By centaurs, we mean human-machine teams that combine the best of each to improve productivity. And in many sectors, this has led to significant improvements, not only in productivity, but also in human welfare. So an example would be the electronic spreadsheet that meant that accounting services became cheaper, the demand for accountants increased, accounting became accessible to more people, and the job became more stimulating and better and less repetitive. You didn't have to repeat operations along many times. So ideally, what we would like to see in a positive future is a future where machines perform the 3 Ds, the dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs, where humans can focus on parts of a task that requires manual dexterity, skill, creativity, the ability to plan, the ability to cooperate and to be in communion with others, and so on and so forth. Can we take the next? Yeah, but of course, this is the ideal case, and centaur work is not necessarily positive. Yeah, as Markus said, the productivity enhancing is augmenting when it increases the goods of work, and it's stunting when it involves when it transforms tasks or reorganizes works into tasks where we get more of the bads of work. Next slide. So as a case study or example of this, we chose to look at Amazon. And Amazon, I think, is an interesting company in many respects. One, it's one of the biggest employers in the United States. It's the next biggest private employer in the US after Walmart. I think it's Walmart. Amazon is also arguably one of the most innovative companies in the US. And they have a lot of in-house research that is fully devoted on how to optimize the operations in their workplace. So I think that in many respects, Amazon is a trailblazer and an innovator. And in that sense, although it's just one company, it represents a possible vision about how the future could look like. What you can see on the images here are one of the newer innovations in Amazon warehouses, also known as fulfillment centers. You can see that the yellow shelves here are lifted by a flat orange robot that can bring the shelves to the workers. Whereas workers previously had to walk between shelves and were fairly slow and inefficient at it, now workers stay in the same workstation all day and the shelves go to them. That means that they don't have to walk as much, but that also means that the pace of work has increased tremendously. for workers, and the movements that a worker needs to do are much more repetitive. And they are also, as a consequence, much more socially isolated because they're in the same place at a workstation without having eye contact with anyone else in the office. So Amazon employs a strategy called chaotic storage, which means that the products are chaotically in every shelf, and the worker gets an instruction to pick a certain object and to scan it and to put it on a conveyor belt. And workers are expected to scan up to 400 items per hour. Next slide. So these innovations, the scanner that keeps track on the rate of scanning, they also have haptic sensors that measure the body movements of workers. And there are also several cameras in each workstation that continuously film the worker and give the worker active feedback whenever the worker falls behind in their work schedule, but also when the worker sits down or leans towards a wall or drinks too much water, because if workers drink too much water, they might have to go to the bathroom, and we can't have that. So what we have here is that we have a combination of a very, very accelerated work pace combined with close and intrusive surveillance and constant digital feedback on presumed deviations from the work norm. And this makes pursuing the goods of work impossible for most, and I would say at least difficult for all. It's very difficult to pursue excellence. So it's not that like the workers are doing anything that requires skill or that they have to learn anything. They just pick stuff from a shelf, they scan it, they put it on the conveyor belt. And they have to do this 400 times per hour. So there's no excellence, and Amazon makes this into a point that they recruit people directly from the street and they just put them in work, and they are supposed to just be able to learn this and do it immediately. Every worker is completely interchangeable, which of course undermines one's sense of making a valuable contribution. Workers are rated on their work performance, but they're rated on an opaque system that the worker has not an access to. So a worker cannot know if they're doing well or bad compared to other workers or compared to their own previous record. They only know that if they fall below a certain threshold, they will be automatically terminated by an SMS. It's also the case that Amazon has actively sought to prevent workers from building bonds of community and friendship at work. So Amazon, even before the pandemic, there was a lot of techniques and measures that Amazon employed to try to separate workers from each other. So workers could not meet each other in the pause rooms and so on and so forth. With the pandemic, Amazon has ramped this up a lot with smart cameras that can detect if two workers approach each other, and then it kind of causes alarm and it tells the workers to keep their social distance. And this is perceived by many workers as dehumanizing, by very stressful. But it's also the case that workers on Amazon warehouses have very high rates of injury compared to other warehouse workers, to other warehouse companies. But it's also the case that in the most automated warehouses, they also have the highest risk of injury. And this is in stark contrast to what we would like from automation or from machines, human corporations. We would like machines to prevent human injury, not to cause human injury. And a lot of the injuries are caused by this very high work pace and which makes following security routines almost impossible. So Amazon has security routines for how to offload and lift packages that are heavy, but it's just impossible to, for example, use the ladder if you want to keep the pace. So you have to kind of pull down very heavy packages, and this can harm you. Next slide.
Yeah, so this explains what we mean by centaur work and how we think it's apparent in Amazon warehouses.
Yeah.
But we'll explain also some kinds of objections that we've thought about. We could also return to this in the Q&A, but there are 4 different kinds of objections to our analysis. I'll let you continue.
Karim. Thanks. Fram. So I think some objections could be that this is not caused by AI, but due to social organization, and this is of course true, as you can see from the famous movie by Charlie Chaplin. Dehumanizing techniques of organizing work are sadly nothing new, but it's also the case that AI enables a whole different level of control, micromanagement, and exploitation. So, if you consider the patent applications from Amazon's various innovation labs, in-house innovations labs, that can give you a window into what they're planning for the future. And what they are planning are exactly this: to use AI technology, sensors in wrists and face, visors, and so on, to in greater detail optimize human activity for the sake of increasing productivity. So this is, we argue that while it is true that they, in general, these are general problems, some of the specific aspects of this are specific to how AI technology has been used. We think that another would be that, say, that automation might be the solution to the problem, and we totally agree with this. But we argue that whether or not automation is used in an augmenting way or in a stunting way is not only an issue about technology and science, but also about politics and political organizations and the power relations in the labor market. Another objection could be that workers sell their labor and they could just, they could just work somewhere else, or that the idea that employers have the right to control what goes on at work. And this is, of course, true, but we also place restrictions on how work is organized in many of the more civilized countries. We don't allow machines or work practices that are very dangerous. And I think that this should be part of the consideration as well in this case. And finally, one objection could be that the state should not promote one conception of the good, like the ones that we have been suggesting, which is maybe paternalistic, it could be described as, or moralizing, and that maybe some people feel like it's fine to work under these conditions. Well, it might be true, but we also argue that if the state does not interfere, has no idea, then they will. That's not a neutral state. That is a state that will be taking the side of the strongest party in the labor market. And if the strongest party are companies, such as the US, then companies will dictate the conditions of work. Whereas if it's labor unions that are the strongest party, then labor unions will dictate the nature of work. And we believe that it's not like the state can be neutral in a significant sense, we argue. Next slide. Yeah, here's where the positivity comes in. So I think we have a historic experience that shows that when legislators and unions work together and work together with companies, I should add, technology can be used for the purposes that improve productivity and reduce the risk of harm. And we can see here a picture of how the forestry tasks looked like 100 years ago, or maybe it was 70 years ago in Sweden. It was very, very dangerous work. And now forestry is much less dangerous and, of course, much, much more productive. And this is just one example, but there are many where the labor unions have pushed for modernization that also reduced the risks. And we think this is entirely possible, but it requires that we not only see the opportunities in new technology, but also the risks that technology will be used to the detriment of workers. Next slide. I think this is just the conclusions. So yeah, a positive future is possible. We believe that work will remain a significant part of the human experience in the foreseeable future. But work can be much better than it is today. Because I think we should remember that even in the absence of these AI organized hellholes, there are a lot of jobs that are actually really, really bad in the sense that people get hurt, people are bored. It's like the jobs are simply dehumanizing or boring or disgusting or stigmatized. And I think that these jobs can become much better. And I think that we think that AI technology and robotics can play a significant role in that. Last slide. Yeah, so conclusions, AI can both enhance worker productivity and be bad for workers. And the future of AI is in the workplace is likely to contain both aspects, both augmentation and stunting. But the mix of how much we have of one or the other will depend on politics rather than technological innovation. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Sadi?
Yes, hello, Sadi Lalontan from the Paris Institute for Advanced Study. Many thanks for this interesting but also a bit chilling presentation. So my understanding is that, I mean, there has always been technological evolution, and the search for productivity has always had dire consequences for the human workers, right? So this is not really new, and the barriers have most of the time either been made by law or by the unions, right? And so my first question is, do you see any directions of the law that would address the specific evolution of this augmented mechanization? That's the first thing. The second one is, there is something that seems to be a bit new in this, automation, is that now with AI and the machines, we are now machines doing management, right? Which was not the case so far, and this is perhaps a problem because the decisions are something that so far was not so easily regulated. So I'm wondering if this is not a dangerous direction. What do you think about this emergence of a new type of work that is given to machines?
Well, I think that, thank you for that question. I think it's a very important question. I think that I think we have some reason to be optimistic, actually. I think that maybe you read this, that the first Amazon plant was unionized last week or 2 weeks ago, and several other plants and fulfillment centers are likely to follow. So that's positive, and I think that also the falling unemployment and the increasing wages for workers in the United States have also increased the bargaining power of employees, and that can also, I think, contribute to a better future. Because I don't think that this has always been the case. And I think that the experience in Sweden is an example, counterexample to that we actually had significant productivity improvements in Sweden in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that were at the same time beneficial for workers. And of course, that was not AI, but it was digital technologies that were improved worker, the work life for many people. Forestry is just one example. There are many other examples of this.
Markus, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sorry, that's a good answer. And the second question, sorry, could you just remind us of what?
Well, this is now the machines are able to do management. They're already doing this. I mean, fixing objectives, doing feedback, evaluation, all tasks that were usually, of a different organizational level. So what?
I mean, there's a few things to say about that, but that's not really something we have looked at here. Other than, I mean, there's feedback that is automatically given by the computers or the AIs that monitor people in the Amazon fulfillment centers, for instance. So the things that check whether you scan enough items per hour, and for instance, that's some kind of automated decision, very simple algorithm, I guess. There's some interesting work by a researcher called Kate Vredenburg, who's written about the right to an explanation more generally, and also the right to an explanation in the workplace, that asks what happens when your boss is an algorithm, or when management decisions are made by computers. Because the worry often is with AI that there's some kind of opacity problem. The AI algorithm is unable to provide reasons for why it decides the way it does, or it's impossible for us humans to understand why a particular decision was reached and not a different one. And I mean, that worry is of course present here as well. I think that's one of the main concerns about shifting management decisions to computers. And on the other hand, of course, people often object that, I mean, it's not like your boss today is always very transparent. So sometimes difficult to understand also the ways of humans. But yeah, sorry. Continue.
Yeah, another concern is that humans are much more flexible and can deal with unforeseen situations to a greater extent. So there are testimony, but Amazon denies that this has happened. But there's testimony from an Amazon fulfillment center where an employee died at the workstation from a heart attack, and there was no manager there, and the body was just lying on the work floor for several hours, and a lot of employees were very disturbed by this. So this is also something that can happen, and a human boss would probably have done something about the corpse, but the algorithm could not do it.
Jean-Eric.
Thank you very much, Jean-Eric Aubert from 2100 Foundation. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation, which raised a very important issue. My question relates to the availability of studies which would be at the meso level or macro level, to document what happened when we see AI being diffused in specific sectors or specific countries. The examples you have given about Amazon is very interesting, but it's a micro level example. My question is, do you know some interesting, well done studies in Sweden or elsewhere at the meso level to see what happened in certain sectors when you have this dissemination of AI, and if you can provide some information, some reference there, that would be most useful.
So my colleagues here at the Institute are actually doing such a study, but they are not done yet. But Pontus Strimling, can look for Pontus Strimling at the Institute for Future Studies. But they're not done yet. One problem with making these studies, or that I think we also found is relying on the secondary literature, is that it happens so fast, right? And academic publication times are very slow compared to all these events, because when we started working with this, they were just recently starting to implement these automatic shelves. That had only happened for like 1 or 2 years, and then the reports started coming out from journalists and labor organizations, and we picked up on this. But as far as I know, there have been no systematic studies of this, because it started to becoming implemented in 2017, and this report started coming out in 2018 and 2019, and so it really happens really fast, and now they've implemented new security routines. We don't know really the effects of that yet. So.
Okay, thank you very much. That would be very useful to see this. Thank you.
Yeah, I have the same impression also of the research. I mean, there's also this the economist Darren Acemoglu, of course, who's written extensively about this at the macro level. But from what I gather, I mean, this is also pretty preliminary results of what we can see already, and also some projections into the future, what we can expect, I think. But this is a rapidly moving target, so it's very difficult to pin down and to study it. And I guess we'll have to wait a few more years for those kinds of study to really be.
As far as I know, the work by Acemoglu, it's more, I would say, some projections rather than real, I would say, empirical evidence of coming from specific sectors. But it's interesting and important, yeah.
Are there other questions from the audience? Okay, while people are preparing their questions, I will ask mine. I actually have two. First one would be, I think you gave us an example of, I guess, bad work that became even worse with AI and robots. I don't know if you agree with that, but my question was whether you have examples of good work that was generally acknowledged as a good work that became bad with robots or AI, or good work that, on the contrary, even became better with AI. So that would be the first question. And the second one is, you've talked about the effects of these robots mostly on aspects of work that I would call perhaps pragmatic, practical, the security aspect, the pace of the work. And in the list you've made of the goods of work, I think there are lots of things that are related to self-fulfillment, which is more, I don't know how to qualify that, idealistic or more related to values, etc. I guess it's really easy for a machine to have a direct impact on the quality of work in terms of security, pace, etc. But the fulfillment, how do you see that being influenced by machines or AI? I know this is a complicated question.
Maybe I can start with the first one, especially with the AI. So I have an example of good work, relatively good work that became worse, and there are a lot of examples of this in the history of technology. And it was the printing profession in the United States, in New York, which was a unionized work, very highly paid. People were good job security and benefits and so on, but analog printers. And what's interesting is that the digital printers were not more productive. It was not more efficient to do it. But by changing from analog in the beginning, and later on it became much more effective, of course. But in the shift from analog to a digital printing happened not because it was more productive, but because the employers could hire could start new companies and hire new people there. And then they could hire non-unionized workers, mostly women and people of color. and they could pay them much less. So you had basically a profession with highly skilled workers that were well paid, and you got a shift to a profession with less skilled workers that were much less paid, but at the same productivity, but more profits for companies. As an example of a good work that became better, I can point to my work, which I think is a very good job. But I think it's so much better with Google, with Google Translate, with Wikipedia, with error correction on typos. But I think the best thing is where you can regret sending the emails, or when the email service reminds you that you said, here is the paper I was talking about, and you forgot to attach it. I mean, that just saved me so much embarrassment. So that I would say it's a good work that became better. But the second question, can you repeat that?
It's about how AI and robots can have an influence on the aspect that's not really practical about the job, but really fulfillment, the interest of the job itself, the recognition, etc. Well,
it depends. So if we make some assumptions about what people crave, we crave social recognition, we crave to see the progress that we're making and get positive feedback on that. All those things could, of course, be improved by AI. And I think that during the pandemic, we've all seen how these tools like this Zoom has been a great asset for a lot of us, and to get this, I have more frequent meetings with my mother now than I had before the pandemic because we use Zoom. So in that sense, I think that technology can improve both aspects of community, but also getting a sense of skill mastery and control and so on. And I also think that just the mere fact that you can offload some of the more boring tasks to software, like, for example, reference systems for organizing references. I mean, I don't think the worst part of when I started this job was when you submit your paper to a journal and they refuse it, and then you send it to another journal and they say you have to change the reference system, and I had to do it manually, and that really sucks. But the fact that I can do it automatically now frees up a lot of my time to do things that are much more interesting, that are more creative and interesting. So I think that just the fact of offloading boring work is in itself creating more of the rewarding work.
I also thought about this in preparation for this talk, and I thought about the GPT-3 system that I'm sure you're aware of, the large AI that produces text that is often very difficult to distinguish from human-produced text. I mean, this is mere speculation, but you could expect that better versions of that text-producing software could help researchers, I guess, in the future to produce a rough and ready version of a research article, for instance. So you just feed the data into the algorithm, and it produces an academic manuscript. So, I mean, they're very formulaic often. It's a very strict formula that you have to follow. So you might as well offload some of that work to those kinds of computers. And then you could, perhaps as a researcher, you could work as an editor of the text instead of producing it in the first place, and you can select what to keep and what to throw out, or suggest different kinds of revisions to make the text more fluent or whatever. But also, I mean, that relates to your question, Simon. If there's any social recognition in being a researcher, I'm not sure it's because we write beautiful text always, but it could raise the objection that, I mean, you're not even writing your own articles. So are you really making an effort here, or are you just a manager of the computer, and it's the AI that produces scientific breakthroughs, and we are just the mediators of that? I mean, again, this is just speculation, but I could see it go both ways with relation to the example that Karim started talking about.
Thank you. Sadi?
Yeah, well, thanks, Markus, because I was...
Oh, you mute yourself.
Yes, so thanks, Markus, because I precisely wanted to share something about GPT-3, and I really suggest that you guys look at it, because these things can actually write bullshit articles, or very difficult to distinguish from what we're doing. And so there's something that is a change that is perhaps already happening to some degree, but that might increase massively, is that the very nature of what we produce intellectually or in communication, a lot of what we produce now is information, right? Is going to be changed by the fact that we're using AI. So I just wanted to just give an indication by citing the work of Baudouin, who studied the interaction of people with automata on the phone. You know, you're calling and then you get, and so what happens is not that these automatons become more and more natural language savvy, right? It's that the people start learning the language of the algorithm. And so when they talk, they just use one word and give orders, and so they adapt. And I'm afraid that the more we're going to use AI, the more the norm of the production is going to change to some unknown degree, perhaps good, perhaps less good. And I think I would really recommend to read that paper, because if you have ever seen the production of GPT-3, I mean, this is really scary, right? And obviously it is starting to be used and will be used more and more in the future. And so lots of people have, devices in their home like Alexa or Siri or whatever, and they're interacting with these automata, and they're being educated with this when they're kids. And so the nature of work, the nature of information is going to change, and this is going like completely unnoticed in a way, or uncontrolled. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. I just noticed that there is no reflection about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's an excellent point. The article is on my reading list. I haven't looked at it yet, but and what you pinpoint here is the fact that we often think about automation as something that happens by creating computers that can navigate our world, or machines that can physically move around and do the things that people do or have done so far in the same way. But I mean, that's never the case. So for instance, when you build a robot that can pick fresh fruit, for instance, to automate agriculture, it's not only that you have to produce a robot with sensitive enough finger-like structures that can pick the fruit without making it into mush, but you also modify the fruit itself, perhaps genetically, to make the fruit more durable and more like hard and easier to pick without crushing it. So I mean, it goes both ways, right? So we adapt the world to the machines, and we adapt the machines to the world. I think that's very often overlooked. So I mean, self-driving cars won't be able to take off until pedestrians start adapting to the presence of self-driving cars. And as you just pointed out, people who interact with machines in the workplace every day will probably start behaving like we do when we talk to a robot on the phone, right? So we make ourselves much more easy to understand by simplifying our language or whatever. So that's a very good point. I don't know if you want to add something, Karim.
No, I think you put it very well.
Okay, I don't know if we reached the conclusion of this webinar. We can take other questions, of course, if there are, and if there are any at the moment. I have a question that I'd like to ask to people participating in this webinar. Is what is your own vision of a positive work in the future? In the beginning of your talk, you've mentioned work replacement. But then didn't really talk about it later, because that, I guess, was not central. But Do you see it as an important component of what work is going to become in the future? Perhaps we'll all work less and we have more time to do something else. What's your vision of work in the future? And will it include a lot of AI and robots, according to you?
Go ahead, Karim, if you want.
Well, so I think that, one thing that I really disagree with both optimists and pessimists in the case of AI and the future work and those things is this idea of technological determinism. This is indirectly an answer here, but what I mean is that I think we underestimate in the last 10 years or 20 years in the discourse on technology, the power of human agency and political agency over the technological process. And I feel like history, even recent history, has actually a lot of examples of political action stopping or changing the course of a technology. Take genetically modified crops in the European Union. This was a technology. We had a choice to adopt it. We chose not to do it. Other countries did it, but we didn't. And so far, we have not adopted it for many crops. Some crops we do, but for many crops, we still haven't done. Nuclear power in many countries has started to be phased out, most notably in Germany, Sweden as well. Belgium, we'll see about that. But, and this is a political choice. It's not dictated by any technological law or like technological determinants. And I think this is the same case with AI. We can choose to not adopt AI. We can choose to adopt it in one way or the other. And this is, I think, partly up to us, to political systems and organizations and so on. But I think that the impression that we don't have a choice actually reduces our choice. So this is, I think that I want to underline. And I think that the future of work, I mean, it could be the case that we work less thanks to AI, but that is also a choice. I think we can, if we work less, we're gonna be less well off than we would be if we work more, but we might be overall more happy because, you know, material, maybe free time is more valuable in some cases than material resources. So, but I think that is a political or social choice that our societies can make and that our society will make. So, yeah.
Markus, perhaps you have a more personal point of view.
So when thinking about your question, and also when thinking about the 2100 Foundation, I mean, you're looking at very long perspectives, and I think it's beyond my and perhaps everyone's capacity to project that far into the future, what work will be like in almost 100 years. But I mean, returning to the paper that we cite, that we rely on, Herzog and Gauss and their conception of what constitutes good work, the goods of work other than money, that's what their paper is called. I mean, their basic assumption in that paper is that given how society is set up, it's very difficult to pursue those kinds of goods outside of the workplace because most people have to work full time to gain a subsistence. And so if you can't do it at work, then you won't be able to pursue these goods. I mean, that's fully consistent with what you suggested in your question, that we actually would see the more labor replacing scenario in the future where people don't have to work as much because of automation or general productivity increases. And I mean, I think that people will still want to pursue those four kinds of goods. You still want to seek community with others. You still want to pursue excellence and so forth, but you don't have to do it necessarily at work. And it's important to point out that Herzog and Gauss don't claim that either. It's just that given how societies are like right now, you have to do it at work. So that vision is completely consistent with, you know, the old Marx quote about in the future society, people will be able to fish in the morning and I can't remember the details, and hunt in the afternoon and criticize after dinner. I think that's a kind of life that I would like to lead, and I think that's one of the things that you pursue, not necessarily in your work life, but one of those three things could be your work, and then you could do the other things on your free time, perhaps. Yeah.
Thank you. It's in continuation from the discussion we had about the need for more studies. Probably there is a need to think more and to redefine better what is good and what is bad with AI work, or this centaur approach that I like you define your topic. I think that probably there is something which is very different from the past when we think about what is good, what is bad with AI-driven work. And either it's augmenting human capabilities or stunting. So that may require in-depth studies. The second type of in-depth studies is the need for good comparative examination about the role of the trade unions, the politicians, and so on, in line with the comment which was made by Sadi at the beginning. The way the society function will impact a lot I would say the condition of use of AI in the economy. And I suspect that where trade unions are sufficiently strong and informed, that will make a good use of AI, while in other countries where or sectors where it's not the case, that will be more problematic. So it's a comment, not a question, but it's really to stress the need for these comparative studies, which would be important in the future. And that relates to the comment made by Markus before. We at the Foundation, 2100 Foundation, of course, we are looking very far. At the same time, things in the long term may depend more and more about the capacity of societies themselves to self-organize in a way that they will limit the bad, I would say, impact of technology. And the more society will be aware and conscious and self-organized, the better it is for, I would say, making the good use of technology, whatever the trends are. So it's a kind of response. We are in the blue, but we know that we could be out of the blue if we are more conscious about it. See what I mean? Thank you very much again for this very interesting presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment.
Excellent comments.
If there are no more comments or questions, perhaps you want to have a word of conclusion, Karim and or Markus?
This has been thank you so much for all the questions and very good recommendations also about reading. And I think that, this is our first study together or article that we write, but we hope that they will not be the last, because I think that there's plenty of more work to do in this area.
Yeah, and as we touched upon, I think there's plenty of space for other researchers also to continue to and contribute to this debate, right? We have a political philosophical perspective, and there's already some economic and economic historian perspectives on this, but this is truly an interdisciplinary topic, so everyone's contributions are needed here, I think. Thanks a lot for all the comments.
Well, thanks a lot to both of you. It was really a great talk, and I hope that your paper is accepted, and we can help build a better future with these kind of studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.